Up next, we have another power-packed keynote speech on policy considerations for the future of cybersecurity by Mr. Allan Oluoch. He is the Policy and Technical Advisor at Ministry of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs. I welcome you, Mr. Allan, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Bridget. I'm honored to share this platform with the various policymakers, industry players, experts, and the wider tech community. And let me start by saying that in today's world, cybersecurity is not a luxury anymore, but an absolute necessity. While organizations have an obligation to safeguard the interests of their shareholders, employees, and customers, nation states have an obligation to provide security for their citizens. So these obligations are now constantly under threat by the rapidly shifting threat landscape. On our continent in Africa, many countries have seen a rise in cyber threats, malicious activities, which in some cases have resulted in sabotaged public infrastructure, financial losses, and even national security breaches. So addressing these threats require a greater commitment, not only from a technology perspective, but also through enforceable policy and legislative safeguards, as well as other risk prevention mechanisms. It's no surprise to most of us that policymakers are constantly playing catch up with the establishment and implementation of the necessary policy, legal, institutional, and regulatory frameworks to address these issues. As a result, several challenges emerge that adversely affect the cybersecurity posture of the continent. And these include limited public awareness and knowledge, where most people view potential cyber risks as far removed from them in cases where they haven't experienced it, while some who've been affected do not really want to reveal the same for fear of vilification. There's also limited institutional capacity to coordinate and implement available cybersecurity legislation. And it's important to note here that most countries do not have comprehensive national coordination frameworks for cybersecurity. And lastly, there's inadequate strategies to combat cybersecurity challenges on the continent. So allow me to share what I hope will be some thought-provoking statistics. In Africa, the digital economy is expected to contribute about $180 billion to the overall economy by the year 2025. And this is expected to quadruple to over $700 billion by 2050. This is a net quadruple effect just from the digital economy. There are also an estimated 700 million unconnected Africans, and there are various initiatives by African governments to rapidly connect them and also address cost issues for those who have access. With this massive potential, one would assume then that there's a robust cybersecurity posture on the continent. I'd like to share some grim statistics as well. It was reported that cybersecurity-related threats accounted for a 10% reduction in GDP on the continent at an estimated cost of $4 billion in the year 2021. This is at a time when we were all struggling and scrambling to recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and trying to get our lives back in order. Secondly, there's just over 50% of African countries, or 29 of the 54 African countries that were surveyed, who have passed substantive legislation to tackle cybersecurity concerns in their jurisdiction. I can proudly say that Kenya is one of those countries who have passed the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act 2018, which was enacted in 2020, while most recently South Africa and Zambia have gazetted their Cyber Crimes Acts in 2020 and 2021 respectively, as well as Mauritius, which has been at the forefront in the fight against cybercrime, They were one of the first African countries to enact legislation on cybercrime and cybersecurity way back in 2003. They have recently repealed these laws, and they now have a Cybersecurity and Cybercrimes Act of 2021, just to mention a few. Africa also accounts for only 21 of 131 certs globally. Interestingly, though, only about 7 of these have emerged in the last 4 years, possibly signifying an urgency on the matter, or perhaps a panic. We really can't tell. But of these 21 certs in Africa, only 9 are sector-specific certs, which are set to respond to particular risks or threats. This to me indicates a lack of maturity in our cybersecurity measures. Further, only 10 African countries possess national cybersecurity strategies that fully address critical infrastructure-related measures. Only 10. While 19 African countries are signatories to multiple, or rather multilateral cybersecurity agreements or bilateral agreements. These are not very exciting stats, considering where our ambitions are as a continent. The Africa Union Agenda 2063 really puts an emphasis on the digital economy as a key socioeconomic pillar for the growth of the continent. Given that cyber threats are borderless, we need to embrace collaboration and partnership. And therefore, I believe that cybersecurity is a team sport. And there's not one individual, organization, company, or nation that can claim a monopoly over cybersecurity best practices. It is in our best collective interest to share best practices, tools, and threat information for us to truly combat this problem. So I choose to opine that this calls for a robust policy and regulatory framework or mechanisms that bring together the different players with the sole purpose of promoting cyber resilience, meaning how quickly can we recover from a breach or an incident in case of one, and how efficient is our collaboration? How quickly do we share information, and who do we share this information with? Thirdly, there's a great emphasis on capacity building. And I'm glad that some of the colleagues who've spoken ahead of me have emphasized this factor. And eventually, we need to build a trust-based ecosystem that can build confidence in the sector and accelerate economic growth. So we all have a shared interest in fostering a common, resilient digital ecosystem. And like I made reference to the Africa Union Agenda 2063, it identifies cybersecurity as one of the key programs and initiatives for accelerating Africa's economic growth and development. So what interventions should we consider in order to strengthen our cybersecurity ecosystem? And can these policy interventions bolster overall cybersecurity position as a continent? I'd like to share what I feel are some common objectives that national and regional cybersecurity policymakers can consider to show up and strengthen these efforts. So we need to consider establishing or strengthening cybersecurity governance structures and legal frameworks to ensure that we can anticipate, withstand, and recover from cyber threats with the least loss ratios possible. We need to ask ourselves who then becomes responsible at each point of the threat management cycle. And these roles and responsibilities need to be clearly defined in policy and legislation. We also need to ensure that responsibility for cybersecurity is anchored at the very highest levels of every organization, company, or even at the national and regional levels. Therefore, according it the requisite political support that it needs. We also need to adequately resource capacity building initiatives in a similar scale to the technical interventions that we have put in place. In my experience, there's a lot of emphasis on building technical capabilities to fight or defend against cyber threats. And as much as threat management is a priority, we also need to build capacity around our institutions and the individuals who are carrying out these activities around cybersecurity. As we do that, we also need a constant review and update of these policy and strategies to meet the demands of this very rapidly changing ecosystem. I mean, technology is changing at such a fast pace that if we don't keep up the pace of changing policy and updating policy and strategy.
I think we've lost Mr. Allan there. Let's just give him a minute to get back to the summit. In the meanwhile, I would request all our guests to visit our exhibitors and do visit all our booths to understand what our sponsors have to offer.